July 1966. Northern Nigeria was tense, not just uneasy anger. In the barracks, soldiers spoke in low tones, not openly, not loudly, but everyone knew something was building. Names were being mentioned and remembered and quietly marked by Northern soldiers. Because just 6 months ago, a lot happened, and that changed everything. In January 1966, a group of young army officers carried out Nigeria's first military coup. In a single night, key political leaders were killed. Prime Minister Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, Northern Premier Ahmadu Bello, Western Premier Samuel Akintola. Power shifted fast, too fast. But here's what a lot of people don't fully understand. That coup didn't settle anything. It exposed something deeper, something dangerous. Because in northern Nigeria, the story was being told very differently. To many, it didn't look like a national revolution. It looked selective. It looked like certain leaders were targeted, while others were spared. And that perception, whether fully accurate or not, spread quickly. By the time July came around, this wasn't just anger anymore. It wasn't debate. It wasn't politics. It was something colder, something more deliberate. Revenge had stopped being an idea. It had become a plan. Now, to understand what happened in July, you have to go back to the beginning, January 15, 1966. In the early hours of that morning, a group of young Nigerian army officers carried out Nigeria's first military coup. Most of them were majors, mid-level officers. Names like Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu, Emmanuel Ifeajuna. Within hours, Nigeria's political leadership was shattered. Prime Minister Abubakar Tafawa Balewa was overthrown and later found dead. Northern Premier Ahmadu Bello was killed in Kaduna. Western Premier Samuel Akintola was also assassinated. It was fast, coordinated, decisive. But almost immediately, questions started to surface. Because when people looked at who had been killed and who hadn't, a pattern began to form. Many of the most powerful northern leaders were gone, but key political figures from the eastern region were untouched. Now, whether that was the intention of the coup plotters or not didn't matter anymore. Perception took over. And in a country already divided along ethnic and regional lines, that perception spread quickly. Then, power shifted again. Major General Johnson Agui Ironsi, the head of state at the time, stepped in and took control. He suspended the constitution, dissolved the political structure, and began moving Nigeria toward a unitary system of government. On paper, it looked like an attempt to stabilize the country. But in the north, it was interpreted very differently. To many, it felt like power had been seized and was now being tightened in one direction. The anger didn't explode immediately. It built quietly across cities, within communities, and most importantly, inside the army itself. Because within the ranks, northern officers were watching, talking, and slowly organizing. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't panic. It was something far more controlled, preparation. By the end of July 1966, everything was already in motion. In the late hours of July 28th, moving into the early hours of July 29th, the counter-coup began. Kaduna became one of its first centers. Gunfire broke the silence of the night. Orders were no longer coming from the top, they were coming from within. This wasn't just about removing a government, it had become personal. Officers linked to the January coup were identified and systematically targeted, and very quickly it went beyond that. Eastern soldiers, many of whom had nothing to do with the original coup, were caught in it. Barracks that once held a single command structure turned into divided, hostile ground. And then, one of the most defining moments of the entire crisis unfolded, not in the north, but in Ibadan. Major General Johnson Agui Ironsi, the head of state, was there on an official visit. With him was the military governor of the western region, Lieutenant Colonel Adekunle Fajuyi. They were both taken. What happened next would become part of Nigerian historical memory. Fajuyi was reportedly given an option: distance himself and survive, or remain with Ironsi. He chose to stay. Both men were killed, and that decision, right there, cemented Fajuyi's place in Nigerian history as a symbol of loyalty under pressure. But the violence didn't end with them. Far from it. Across northern Nigeria, the situation escalated. What began as a coordinated military action started spilling beyond control. Civilian tensions, already high after January, began to erupt. Attacks spread. Fear spread faster. And at that point, this was no longer just a coup within the army. It was evolving into something wider, something far more unstable. With Ironsi gone, Nigeria was once again without clear leadership. But this time, things were different. Because what followed wasn't rushed, it was calculated. The officers leading the counter-coup weren't just reacting anymore. They were thinking about what came next. Yes, there was anger. Yes, there was a desire for revenge. But there was also a need for stability, at least from their point of view. And that's where a new name entered the picture: Yakubu Gowon. At the time, he wasn't the most senior officer in the Nigerian army. In fact, by strict military hierarchy, others ranked above him. But rank wasn't the priority anymore. Acceptability was. Gowon was seen as relatively neutral. He wasn't closely tied to the January coup, and he wasn't deeply entangled in the political divisions that had already torn through the country. To the northern officers driving the transition, he was someone who could hold things together, at least temporarily. A compromise. And in that moment, that was enough. So, Yakubu Gowon was declared Nigeria's new head of state. But let's be clear, this didn't resolve the crisis. If anything, it exposed how deep it had already gone. By mid-1966, trust between regions had collapsed. In the East, there was a growing belief that what was happening was no longer just political, it was targeted. In the North, many felt the counter-coup had corrected an imbalance, that it was justified. Two completely different interpretations of the same events, and a country caught in between. Because at that point, Nigeria wasn't just unstable, it was divided. And what lay ahead was no longer just about military control. It was about whether the country itself could survive what was coming next.